Listen, right now you could be only a few clicks away from experiencing something amazing, something that has changed thousands of lives all over the world. I'm talking about a high consciousness field similar to those at pilgrimage sites and sacred places. It's where people go to heal, to connect, and to become the best possible version of themselves. With FLFE, you can bring such a high consciousness field into your home right now. It's a spiritual quantum technology based on the work of Nikola Tesla. Better sleep, more energy, greater well-being, improved finances, electrosmog mitigation. These are only some of the things people on the FLFE service are experiencing. Try it now for 15 days completely free of charge, no credit card needed. Just click on a link down below to start your free, no strings attached FLFE trial right now. Hey, Inspired Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers, it's John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're whole, we're free. And welcome to part 5 of The End of Religion as We Know It. Thank you so much for tuning in on Rumble, X, and YouTube. Welcome in the live chat. I see Sharon, I see Jay Fraj, I see Sheena's. I see, of course, Christine, the wise thumbs in the live chat. Gypsy Daisy, welcome. Who else is here? Mystic Beast Production. Then we see Nazi, Lisa, Michael, Annie Kurtz. So good to see you, Light Girl. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all for tuning in. All right, my friends. So a quick disclaimer, or for those who haven't seen the first 4 parts of The End of Religion as We Know It, this series, it's in the video description. There's a playlist, you can watch all of them. And we have decided that we're going to make this for now an open-ended series. So we're just going to continue, maybe not every day, but every now and then we're going to just add parts and add parts. And we're gonna probably discover and explore different scholars, different authors, different speakers on the subject as we're doing research around it. Currently, we're discussing the second. Well, the other book wasn't technically by Mauro Bellini; it was about him. But this is one written by Mauro Bellini, Gods of the Bible, and we're going to start really dissecting this today a little deeper. And as always, I want to preface that this is not an attempt to destroy religion, not an attempt to discredit anyone's faith or belief systems. We're simply following the breadcrumbs and the truth, and I think it's important to do that. As we strip the falsehoods and the deceptions and the lies of centuries and millennia away, I believe we will, what will remain is the hidden truth, right? The naked truth, the new second part, the second episode of the Naked Truth Show with Frank Jacobs going to air in the next couple of days here on Inspired. We're continuing this journey, a new format, a new show. I love it. So, all right, let's dive into it. And let's look a little bit deeper into what we got here. This is the book that we're going to sort of talk about today, but not just the book, but concepts that are presented in this book. And it's written by, as I said, Mauro Bellini, and his working method is really characterized by 2 fundamental elements: reading and reporting what is written literally in that Hebrew code and pretending that what is written is true. A much more concrete and much more fascinating interpretation emerges than what has been handed down to us over the centuries as an absolute indisputable truth. So for Bible scholars and people who are versed in the Bible, people who have been reading it for a long time, this is sort of like another avenue perspective to look at the Bible. So the principles outlined, like we said, are: what if we make sure that the translations that we have are as clean as possible? And we're going to dive into why that is even hard to do. And then read it as if it were true, as if it were a literal story. So this is the whole premise of this discovery, okay? Okay, let's move forward in this, friends. What is the Bible? I think this is a big question. And I think, although we already talked about it somewhat, I want to dive a little bit deeper into it today because that's the foundation for everything else we'll find. The text of the Bible is both fragile and uncertain. The Old Testament is a series of books that are among the most frequently written, rewritten, manipulated, altered, interpolated, modified, erased, corrected, eliminated, and then officially rediscovered in human history. We are thus not referring to a single coherent text written with a specific purpose at a precise moment in the distant past. I think this is very, very important, that it's just because we're holding a book in our hands today and it appears to be one book, that does not mean that this is what we think of as books. As an author sitting down, we know who the author is, we know when he was born or she was born, and then they're writing a book, and then they're publishing this book, and we have reference and context. For a lot of the things, we have neither, okay, neither. So this is really important. The Bibles in our possession are essentially written based on the Stuttgartenser Bible, the printed version of the Leningrad Masoretic Codex, prepared between the 6th and 9th centuries CE by the so-called Masoretes, guardians of the Masorah, that is, the traditions of the school of Tiberias, who belonged to the family of Moshe ben Aaron ben Asher. Okay, so we're going to get into some nitty-gritty details here as to what we're holding in our hands today. And we're holding different books depending on where you live in the world. The Bibles we have at home are derived from this version of the Old Testament, but with significant differences between the various denominations that follow this set of books. Catholics must believe that the Old Testament contains 46 divinely inspired books. For the Jewish canon, however, only 39 books are recognized as divinely inspired. I see a few people joined in here. So what we're going to find out in the next few minutes, and I want to take a few moments not to rush through this, because I believe we have to take off all blinders, all rose-colored glasses, even the faith-colored glasses. And let's just examine the books and how these books are being treated today by different denominations of even the same basic body, Christianity, but then Christianity versus Judaism or even Islam. And even just within Christianity and the denominations of Christianity, a lot of them look at the Bible very, very differently, and what texts are divinely inspired and what aren't. This is actually fascinating, and I think it's important for us to discuss this, okay? So some books Christians accept as divinely inspired are not recognized in the Jewish canon. These are the books of Tobias, Judith, Wisdom, Baruch, Sirach, the first and second books of Maccabees, and some passages of Esther and Daniel. Protestants essentially adhere to the Jewish canon. In contrast, and sorry for my typos, Coptic Christians also consider the book of Enoch and Jubilees as divinely inspired. So you can already see it gets kind of confusing. The Coptic Christians, the Jews, and we'll get into others like the Orthodox. The Greek Orthodox Church does not use the Codex of Leningrad as a basis, but the text of the Septuagint, the Bible written in Greek in Egypt in the 3rd century BCE. So here we have already a huge discrepancy. Compared to the Masoretic version, the Greek version has about 1,000 variations, some with significant differences in the meaning of the texts. This used to be the foundation for the church fathers in the 1st centuries after Christ, until the Roman Church decided to use the Hebrew canon as its foundation. Are you confused yet? So I was sitting with that as I was reading the books, and what I was doing is remembering each and every time I'd been to church, I had talked to a priest, a preacher, a pastor of various denominations. My background is definitely Catholic in terms that I grew up in a Catholic environment, not my family, but just the environment I grew up in was Catholic. And so that was my first contact. Then I was invited to a Protestant church just as a guest, and I saw that and how that differed from the Catholic version. Later, I was, I was at a Methodist church, a Baptist church, and many others. And what would fascinate me is the very, very different style and flavor of how the word of God is transported and the meaning of it and where the emphasis lies. So even within that, and this just triggered my personal experience. So then when I read this, that's in this book here, Gods of the Bible, I thought, my God, are we even remotely talking about the same thing? So it's not just that they interpret what they read in the Bible differently, but the version of the Bible that they're holding is based on a different translation from a different time period in a different part of the world. So I mean, I was aware of the variations, but not how different they are and how many versions of this belief system actually exist out there. On the other hand, the rabbis rejected the Septuagint and considered only the books written in Palestine in Hebrew before the 5th century BCE were acceptable. In northern Palestine, however, the truth is not in the code written by the Masoretes, but in the Samaritan Torah. The Samaritan Torah has up to 2,000 variants compared to the Masoretic code. Also in the Samaritan canon, only the first 6 books are recognized as true and divinely inspired. Okay? Really, really interesting. Let's move forward. The Masoretes define themselves as keepers of the Mazorah, the tradition, while the Samaritans define themselves as keepers of the Torah, the law. So there's a fundamental difference. The keepers of the tradition or the keepers of the law. The Peshitta, the Syriac Bible, accepted by Maronites, Nestorians, Jacobites, and Melkites, also differs from the Masoretic Bible. Part of Jewish culture believes that the Talmud contains more truth than the Bible itself. So, we're getting at a picture here. I think Mauro really painted a very interesting picture here. So there is no one Bible. There are many Bibles, many possible Bibles, and all of these Bibles, with their many variations, are declared indisputable true by those who live in a tradition that contains them. And this is true. You go to any church, I don't care where you are, but I'm just going to talk about the southern United States. In the buckle of the Bible Belt where we live, there seem to be more churches than hospitals, than grocery stores. And I'm not even exaggerating. There are places where you have one church after the other. It's like a church district. And if you were to walk in one church, the Church of Christ, and then a Baptist church, and then a Methodist church, you would find that you could get quoted the same passage of the Bible, or at least seemingly the same, and get a completely different interpretation of what that means. And I think what's laid out here by Mauro Bellino is clear. It depends on what tradition you're in. It depends on how you were brought up. It depends on how it was taught to you. But why? Why would a book need to be taught in the first place? Why couldn't it simply be read? And here we go into why I picked Mauro Bellino as the first author that we're going to examine here, or the first author's work. I found, the more I read from him and see from him, I found him to be a very non-dogmatic man who seems to be following the scientific method as accurately as possible. And when he can't, because there's not enough reference or not enough data, then he simply says there's not enough data. We can't translate this word. We can't translate this phrase because we don't know exactly what it means. I find this to be extremely honest, and I had no bad feelings while reading this, which oftentimes I have with other books. It feels like the author is trying to pull one over on you, or trying to sneak something in there when you read between the lines This is not the case here, and that's why I appreciate these books so much. Each time, again, pardon my typos, each time the texts were rewritten or copied under dictation, they changed for various reasons. We also do not know how these texts were read. This is very interesting. How these texts were read. What does that mean? The biblical texts were originally written only with consonants. So you might have seen this with the word Yahweh, where you didn't have the vowels in there, just the Y, the H, the W, and the H, Yahweh. The Masoretes inserted the vowels only around the 6th to 9th century. But because of the unique structure of the Hebrew language, a different vocalization, even a different inflection in the pronunciation of the vowels leads to significant variations in the meaning of various terms. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. What they're saying is that we're not simply dealing with manipulation, conscious manipulation. We're dealing with a text that was written without vowels, so it was found with consonants, and then the vowels were inserted later. But how the vowels were inserted wasn't up to the original authors, but to the people who translated and rewrote it with the vowels in it. What the author here, Mauro Bellini, is saying that the Hebrew language and the meaning of word changes with the vocalization or invocation, how you say a word and how you pronounce it. Now, this seems to be a tough concept to grasp, but I think I found an example in the English language. This is going to be understandable on first sight by everyone who lives in the south of the United States. For those who don't, I'll explain the concept. There is an expression in the southern United States. It's bless your heart. Now, if you live anywhere in Europe, if you live anywhere else in the world, then bless your heart seems like a beautiful thing to say. You will not find a negative meaning to it because, oh, bless is a good word. Your heart, somebody is saying something positive. So bless your heart is a phrase commonly used in the southern United States with multiple meanings depending on the context, the tone, and the relationship between the speaker and the listener. Here's a breakdown of its various interpretation. There's genuine sympathy. In its original sense, bless your heart is an expression of genuine sympathy and compassion. It can be used to show concern and understanding for someone's misfortune, such as, I'm sorry or so sorry to hear about your loss, bless your heart. So this would be the most approachable, or for non-Southern United States speakers, this would make kind of sense. It's a positive thing. It could be very insincere though. However, the phrase can also be used insincerely to express condescension, derision, or even contempt. This tone is often used to belittle or mock someone, as in, you're so stupid, bless your heart. I'll tell you that bless your heart is used more often than not as a condescending thing. Oh, bless her heart. She's done something stupid, or somebody said something that doesn't make sense. Oh, bless her heart. It can be basically a fuck you right to your face without saying it. You're saying something nice, but you're actually not saying something nice. The English are very good at that as well. But what I mean is, if you say, oh, bless your heart, it usually means this is sincere. But if you say, oh, bless your heart, it usually means, well, you're not quite right there. So even today, we can find examples of how one phrase can mean very, very different things depending on how we vocalize it, or what kind of tone we use, and who is talking to whom. Okay, so let's move on. While many questions remain to be answered, one thing is clear. The original text of the Bible does not correspond to what we have today. Furthermore, all scholars agree that the original stories mainly contained in the book of Genesis are revised copies of older texts, in this case, Sumerian, Akkadian, and Phoenician texts. So, what the author is saying, that the scholars who've studied the Sumerian, Akkadian, and Phoenician texts that predate the Bible say that those were the original stories, and a lot of Genesis and other books are copies of these original stories. However, the Sumerian, Akkadian narratives are defined as myths, as legends, and fables, while the Bible, which is in part derived from them, represents the truth inspired by God. The originals are fairy tales, while the copy is the divine truth. A logical conclusion, right? This is where I think we make a huge difference, and I think even religions make a huge difference between how theologians, how scholars look at the Bible and what they present the Bible as. So, if you find much older texts, much older, so they must be more original than the ones in the Bible because they're older. When you find that and you compare the two and they're super similar, how can you say that the original is a fairy tale? It's just made up, but the copy is the truth. It's not just the truth, it's godly, it's God's divinely inspired truth. How can you reconcile those two things? The truth is you can't. You can ignore, you can choose tradition, convention, and faith over what you're finding. That is your prerogative. You can do that. That's your right. But that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to discover and follow the breadcrumbs where they lead us. So, yet theologians claim to know and assert with indisputable certainty that God inspired these texts and that the Bible contains the divine word. The fact that they consider the Bible a sacred text did not stop them from altering and interpreting it at their discretion, falsifying translations, or using allegories and metaphors so that the text would reflect their conception of God. This conception of God, however, did not exist when the Bible was written. It is interesting that for centuries, the Roman Catholic Church forbade people from reading the Bible without a priest being present. Why is that? Could you possibly come to different conclusions if you didn't have someone whispering in your ear? And what I find so interesting is, other than you heard it from someone else, that heard it from someone else, that heard it from someone else, how can someone possibly imagine what an unknown, and most of them are unknown authors, wanted to say, but did not say? How is that possible? Who has that ability to do that? And frankly, today, even today, where you have in a book that's released in 2024 and is analyzed, and there's a review written by a professional reviewer in some magazine or some newspaper or some blog, and they tend to want to interpret what the author wanted to say. And they mostly get it wrong, as the authors oftentimes confirm, no, that's not what I wanted to say. That's just their interpretation. So how can we do that for books and texts that were written thousands and thousands of years ago? We don't know exactly in which language they were originally written, by the way, and we don't know who wrote them to begin with. As we can see, when it comes to the Bible, we're only left with copies of missing original archetypes that possibly reported ancient oral stories lost in the fog of time. Theologians, however, have built on it very elaborate religious and dogmatic worldviews that have given rise to the three religions of the book, and the three religions being Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, which comprise 4.3 billion people in the world. 4.3 billion people are connected to the Bible, their religions. More than half of humanity bases their existence and their life values directly or indirectly on the Bible. This book has thus become the fulcrum and the heart of a complex power structure the text on which this power structure relies is the frailest thing in the world. And whenever the text seems to contradict the power structure, theologians see fit to change, reinterpret, or mistranslate it. So what we're finding is that when their power structure is questioned, that when the book does not say what they needed to say to continue their power structure, they need to go to allegory, to metaphors. And they're saying to people, this is not a literal book. This is a book full of metaphors and allegories. And we know how to interpret it because the way you read it is wrong. But what are they really saying? They're simply saying that they have been taught how to think for much longer than you. Or taught what to think, much longer than you. They've been taught what to think and how to think about these things and in what context to put them. When you start taking away their foundation because you're thinking outside of the box, because you're actually saying, well, could it be that these folks that wrote these books or texts wrote what they saw as they saw it? That's a very logical thought. Why not? Why is that so difficult to imagine? A few examples. The word olam is regularly translated with eternity in the Bible. Ancient Hebrew dictionaries clearly explains that olam does not mean eternity. Eternity itself is a concept alien to the Bible. So what Mauro Bellini is saying is that the concept of eternity does not occur in the Bible. That's a biggie. To me, that's a biggie. That's something that people discuss all the time. As a matter of fact, it's part of the biggest thread. You will either spend eternity in hell or in heaven. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you for your contribution. So when eternity does not really show up in the Bible, then what does that word mean? Well, we don't know exactly. That's why he says, replace it with the word olam, as we don't know exactly, but it does not mean eternity. A similar case is the word kavod, which is translated with the word glory, but does not mean glory. As we will see, there are many more examples like these. When we use exegesis, that is to me an oxymoron word that I've been trying to wrap my mind around. It's a whole discipline of how to interpret and properly interpret spiritual texts, exegesis. And I couldn't remember how to pronounce that word for many, many years. I still get it wrong because the very concept of this discipline bothers me greatly. And I think it always has. That people would say that they have the ability to interpret something and its true meaning that's thousands and thousands of years old. Okay. When we use this technique to interpret the Bible, we find texts full of contradictions and inconsistencies, a maze that can only be navigated with metaphors, allegories, and blind faith that theologians have the ability to interpret exactly what the authors meant to say, but did not write. That's the key point. They think they know what they meant, although they didn't write what they meant. When we read the Bible as if it is true and literal, we find a coherent storyline without any contradictions. I think this is the biggest takeaway from reading these books and continuing to study it, that all the contradictions, all the question marks, all the blank, sort of the blank spots that you need to fill in with something, they disappear. We're going to go into this in the next parts, but this is really, we're going to show how when you read the Bible literally versus, we're going to go through real examples. If you read it literally versus metaphorically, and if you insert the correct translations, if they're available, how all contradictions disappear. All timeline contradictions disappear. All nonsensical contradictions, they all disappear. So let's pretend that the Bible we read is the one originally written. This is what he said. He said, let's pretend. And then we'll see where we go to. That the Bible that we read is the one originally written. Let's also pretend that the biblical authors, when they wrote something, wanted to tell us exactly that. Let's pretend that the ancient writers left in their writings the memory of actual events, and let's pretend that these books can be considered as history books. This is what we're pretending as we move forward. The term, and here we're going to go. We're going to start looking for God in the next iteration of this series. I know we've already elaborated on some of these concepts, but we're going to go deeper and we're going to find more proof and more evidence, because this is the whole point. I do not want you to watch this series and rely on my word or what I am saying. What I would like for you to have is the ability to do this for yourself. Pick up this book, go to a library, pick it up, find dictionaries, do it yourself, and see if you find contradictions in this work. That would be the scientific method, right? Okay. So when we're looking for God, the term Elohim is translated as God in the commonly available Bibles, or in the Bible generally known to non-specialists. However, this term was left untranslated in the Interlinear Bible edition and published by San Paolo Edizioni, prepared for specialists and scholars. Wherever we read God and think that's what the authors wrote, the specialists read Elohim. They were made aware that this term is problematic for unbiased translators. Okay, so the San Paolo Edizioni is the major Catholic publisher in Italy for the Vatican. So they put out different Bibles for you and me and their scholars and other scholars. And the one word, the most important word of the Bible, the word God, the omnipotent, all-powerful God, is left untranslated in their version, the version of the scholars. Now, why is that? Why? What could that possibly mean to you and me if the scholars, when they read the book that they pretend is the same book that you're holding, that the most important word in the book that you're holding does not appear in their book? They have literally, for their scholars, taken God out of the Bible. It's not me saying it. This is what the different versions show. I'm asking questions more than I'm providing answers, friends. You have to ask those questions yourself to find those answers. Whatever Elohim means, why provide different translations for different readerships? Who is so afraid of people realizing that there is so much uncertainty around the very term that monotheism is founded on? Monotheism is one God religion, right? Even if we accept that Elohim means God, we should ask ourselves, is our idea of God today the same as the concept of God that ancient Semitic peoples had thousands of years ago? The answer the author provides is obviously no. But here's the thing. To this day, Mauro Bellini, who's been doing this for 40 years, who's been for 10 years an official translator for the Vatican until he started writing his own books and sharing his findings, and then they completely cut him off and never spoke to him again. But he says 40 years into this, proficient in ancient Hebrew, proficient in Latin, proficient in Greek, and he says, we don't know what Elohim means. We have plenty of examples of how it is being used, and we can start to grasp the concept of who the Elohim were, sure, but we don't know what that word exactly means. And anyone who translates it, by definition, interprets it, not as it means this in our language, but this is what I believe it means, or this is what I want it to mean, which is very different from this is what it means in Hebrew, or this is what it means in Greek, and this is what it means in English or Italian. It's a different story. So nobody knows what Elohim really means. But that's the word. God does not appear in the Bible. Elohim appears in the Bible, which is, by the way, a plural. Elohim is not the only term in the Bible translated as God. Conversely, Elohim is not always solved with God either. This is confusing as hell to me. Confusing only if I accept that what I've been taught so far from Bible scholars, traditional or conventional Bible scholars, is true. I don't think they were trying to lie to me. I think they don't know themselves. I don't think they've ever done this. I think they were discouraged from doing it because I think they were told that non-believers and Satan's minions will try anything and everything to discredit the word of God. And they will come up with all kinds of false stories. The false prophets in the end days will appear, as people have called me a false prophet in the end days. But why? Explain it to me like I'm 5. You would never, ever accept the same standard for any other book than you are accepting for the Bible. You would never accept a history book that is written and translated and copied and rewritten and misinterpreted in so many ways as the truth. As a matter of fact, so many of the people that call me all kinds of names because I talk about this are very proficient in other conspiracies and know how they were concocted. Why is this different? How can you say that a selection of books that changes from country to country, whose meaning changes from denomination to denomination? So let's just for a moment pretend that we're talking about the same set of books. How can you say that everything in this world has been manipulated? Absolutely everything, and we know that it has been, but this not. How can people say that the Roman Catholic Church has been one of the main keepers of the books of the Bible? The Roman Catholic Church is hated by many other denominations and hated by a lot of people in the world for various reasons, and I'm not trying to in any way, shape, or form say that that's invalid, because I believe it's the exact inversion of what it says it is. But so people absolutely hate the Catholic Church, believe the Vatican is one of the worst organizations, but at the same time, they believe the book that they're holding is the Holy Gospel and has never been tampered with. I do not understand that. There's where my passion comes in, because it has no logic, no common sense in it. But because I believe what these people who call me a false prophet for just sharing what I'm finding are thinking is that I'm trying to lead people away from God and to Satan or to the devil. But if you've been here for even 5 minutes, you know that nothing could be further from the truth. I'm telling you what I'm telling you from my personal experience. I don't need a book. I don't need an interpreter. I don't need a preacher. I don't need a pastor. I don't need any other person in this world to facilitate my relationship with my Creator. I never have, I never will. I don't need anyone to tell me what the Creator wants me to know. I pick up the spiritual phone, if you will, and I call him myself, or her, or it. This is all that I'm saying, is have that honest, authentic relationship and use that as a foundation, an honest relationship to explore these topics. I think it would be a much clearer path. And I don't bring that dogma or any dogma into this work of research. Research and dogma do not go together, because this puts you into cognitive dissonance or convergent thinking. It means that you will disregard anything that pulls away the foundation of something that you hold in high regards. So if religion, if the church, how it's lived today, your church, I don't know which church, but your church, however it lives religion and spirituality today, is what you 100% believe in, and you don't want to lose that at any price, even though the truth or facts speak a different language, you will ignore those facts because you don't want to lose that. That is your right to do. But it doesn't mean you're following truth. It means you're following what makes you feel the best way. That's okay. You can do that. As a matter of fact, most people live in a way that they're looking for things that make them feel better. That is legitimate. We're all doing that. When we find out that the things that make us feel better are not the truth, but a lie, we can do the adult thing and move on and improve, or we can ignore and live the lie. That's what we've been doing collectively for so long. I just don't stand for that. So, before I kind of give you, it's not going to be called homework because I'm not your teacher and I don't claim to be, I don't want to be. But there is a little glossary that will help you maybe read your Bible in a different and more authentic way. I'm passionate about this subject, and I think it's going to go much deeper. It's going to transcend the Bible. We're probably going to go into other books. We're probably going to go into other spiritual disciplines. But religion as a concept is it's on the edge right now. And it's not just because I'm talking about this, but because apparently many people all over the world are having the same inspiration to dig deep on this. I knew when the quote unquote revival started a few years ago, in 2020, there was a revival. It was not hard to understand why. The return of many people to whatever their Christian tradition was is understandable when uncertainty is so big and when the things you thought were permanent are not. 2020 showed us that nothing is set in stone in this world. Everything is changing. And when all those structures do not provide you with security any longer, you go to the first frame. And that is the traditions that you grew up in because they're still there. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with thinking that way. My question is, do you want to replace just one belief system for another belief system, or are we together looking for truth? We might get it wrong at times, sure. But the seeking and the intention to not let up, to not give in, to not settle for something just because it's comfortable, that's what we might share in this. And that's what I hope we share in this. So people say, well, are you a Christian? And I'm having a hard time saying yes, and I'm having a hard time saying no. From what I have heard, read, and studied, the true Christian, if we think of Jesus Christ as the originator of some of those values, or at least the reviver of those values, sure. Then I seek to live a Christ-like life. Yes, easily. But if you take my hand and want me to get baptized and want me to adhere to the rule of some house of worship that had to first, by its own definitions, destroy some of God's creations to build an artificial altar where you need to go and follow their rules to be accepted in the eyes of God, then hell no, I'm not a Christian. You better believe I'm not. That story was invented simply to control people, control their behavior, control their faith, control their relationship with the Creator. Does religion have good sides? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Of course it does. Even within an artificial structure, there's always truthful things and real things. Yes. We're going to continue to look at this in a nuanced way. It's not black or white. It's not one or the other. The truth is going to be that we will find that some things were true and a lot of things were false. That's my best guess here, my best bet. So here's one more thing that I want to offer to you. That's from Mauro Bellini, and he says, here's how you might want to read the Bible if you want it to be as authentic a book as possible to read. When you find the word God, replace it with Elohim. In the interest of accuracy, we're going to use the words that we can use, and if we don't have translations, we can translate it. When you find the word Lord or eternal, replace it with Yahweh. If you find the word Most High, replace it with Elion. When you find the word angel or angels, replace it with malach or plural, malachim. Replace Spirit of God with ruach of the Elohim, and replace glory of God or the Lord or of the eternal with kavod. Sorry, my typo, kavod. K-A-V-O-D of the Elohim, or kavod of Yahweh, not kavoth, kavod. K-A-V-O-D. So this is what the translator recommends to use rather than the words that are in your Bible. And as you can see, the scholars' versions often have different expressions. They don't have God, they have Elohim. Why? Why are we doing this? In the most general sense. Religion has been the biggest control system, and I will tell you my first real experience with the awesome power of religion. I was 6 years old, first grade. And as I told y'all, back then it was compulsory religion class. You could go to Catholic class where I lived, or you could go to Protestant class. But religion was a compulsory subject. We had a former nun, old lady, who was our religion teacher. The first thing I remember, because I was about the only non-baptized, because my parents are not religious or spiritual for that matter, I was the only non-baptized kid in class. And the first thing she made me feel was excluded. She said, if you're not baptized, you're not part of this group. You're not part of, I want to say she said something like the holy body of God. That's probably what she said. And every single week, we had 1 or 2 religion classes. Every single week, she made me feel this way. Every single week, she made me feel guilty and ashamed for not being baptized. So one day I came home and I told my parents I want to get baptized. They didn't stand in the way. They made it happen. I got baptized, and I finally thought, now she won't pick on me. But then the next thing that happened, that even at 6 years old, I was very curious, and I was asking questions about God. I was asking questions that derived from the stories she shared with us that she did not like. And she said, you shouldn't ask such questions. These are stupid questions. Where did God come from? Or what was before God? Questions that I had as a child. And she called in my parents. My father came to school, and she basically told him that he should control me better, that I'm asking stupid questions. Thankfully, my dad stood up for me and said, well, shouldn't you be able to answer these questions? Because if you're not, what are you doing teaching a religion class? So he did not belittle her faith or tell her how he feels about religion. He simply said, well, kind of the same thing he would say to a math teacher. Well, if you can't answer those questions about math, who can? And why should my son quit asking questions about math when you're the math teacher? That's what he said to the religion teacher. So I went through the baptism and first communion, and the one thing that I felt when we kids went to the communion classes, we had communion classes in the afternoon. We went to that church, and it was without the parents. It was just us kids and the priest. I felt so incredibly uncomfortable and out of place and not misunderstood completely. And I was constantly reminded to not be myself. And I wasn't the kid that would run around in church or do something stupid. I was simply being myself. I was so discouraged from being that. As a matter of fact, every conversation I had with the priest was basically, in one way or another, was don't be yourself. So I eventually left the Catholic Church and never rejoined any other organized religion. Studied many of them, was deeply interested in the traditions. find a lot of value in studying that. But I can't apply a different standard to studying religion than I apply to any other field that I study. I have to go by the truth that I find. And if the truth that I find contradicts the convention and the tradition, I'll take truth. Two things can be true at the same time. You can have a true and honest relationship with your creator and call him God if that's what you want. And that can be true. And you can disregard pretty much anything that you've until now considered as the holy gospel, and those things can still be true at the same time. I honestly believe that. But that's up to you all. We're going to just explore and continue showing you what we find. All right, my friends, thank you so much for tuning in. We love you. We appreciate it. We'll be back with you again very, very soon.